The crack of skin against skin echoed louder than the judge's gavel. For a split second, the courtroom forgot how to breathe. Before we begin, this story sparked debates across continents. Power, dignity, self-defense, accountability. I want to know something before you watch. If something like this happened in your country, what do you think the outcome would be? Drop your country in the comments and tell me, would she be defended or destroyed? Let's see how different the world really is. Now let's begin. Honorable Amara Nkosi did not fall. The sting bloomed across her cheek, hot and electric, as if someone had pressed a brand into her flesh. The metallic taste of adrenaline flooded her mouth. The scent of polished oak and stale air conditioning thickened around her. Somewhere, a woman gasped. Somewhere else, a phone hit the floor. Officer Daniel Reeve was still mid-motion, his hands suspended in the air, as though even he couldn't believe what he had just done. The slap had not been loud, but it had been historic and irreversible. 3 seconds earlier. Order, the judge barked. The courtroom in District Hall 4 had been simmering for hours. Journalists pressed shoulder to shoulder, microphones angled like weapons, security tense as drawn wire. Amara stood straight at the defendant's table, charcoal suit immaculate, braids pinned high and regal against the crown of her head. A member of parliament. Elected. Decorated. Targeted. The charge? Incitement. The truth? She had demanded police accountability in the death of a 17-year-old boy. That was all. Outside, protest chants pulsed faintly through the thick courthouse walls like a distant heartbeat. Justice for Malik. Justice for Malik. Inside, Officer Reeves stood to her right, assigned as court security. His jaw had been tight all morning. Amara had felt his stare before she'd seen it. Not curious. Not neutral. Resentful. The moment. I will not retract the statement, Amara said calmly. Her voice carried without effort. Years in Parliament had trained her tone into something that could slice marble without rising above conversational volume. The facts remain. A murmur rippled. Reeves stepped closer. You will respect this court, he muttered. I am, she replied, eyes forward. Then he grabbed her arm. Hard. The room inhaled sharply. Do not touch me, she said. It wasn't shouted. It was a boundary. Something flickered in his eyes. Anger? Humiliation? The fragile panic of a man who felt watched? And then, the slap. After the impact, sound collapsed inward. Amara's head turned with the force, braids swinging across her shoulder. For one disorienting second, she saw nothing but white light and floating dust motes. Her grandmother's voice rose from somewhere deep in memory. They will try to make you small, child. Never shrink. She straightened. Slowly. The courtroom clock ticked. Reeves' breath came faster now. He looked less like an authority figure and more like a man who had just realized he'd stepped off a cliff. You don't get to, he began. He didn't finish. Because this time, it was her hand that moved. The turning. It wasn't rage. It wasn't vengeance. It was reflex. Years of self-defense training forced upon her after her first election campaign. Quiet lessons at dawn before parliament sessions. Muscle memory carved into bone. When his arm came forward again, whether to restrain her or silence her, she pivoted. Grip. Shift. Redirect. A sharp twist at the wrist. A destabilizing step. The polished floor betrayed him. Officer Daniel Reeve hit the ground with a crack that reverberated off marble columns. The room erupted. Shouts. Scraping chairs. Someone screaming for medical assistance. He wasn't moving. Amara stood above him, chest rising steadily, palms open, breathing controlled. I told you, she said quietly, though no one could hear her over the chaos. Do not touch me. Freeze frame. Cameras were rolling. 3 angles caught it. 2 live streams captured the slap. One journalist's shaky phone recorded the fall. Within minutes, clips began uploading. Within hours, the nation would be arguing. But in that moment, amid the ringing noise and flashing red emergency lights, Amara felt something unexpected. Not triumph. Not fear. Clarity. The system she had tried to challenge politely had just revealed itself violently. And now, there would be no quiet resolution. The conflict. As paramedics rushed in, Judge Harlow shouted commands no one followed. Security swarmed, but hesitated before touching her. Because now every hand in the room was visible. Every move was recorded. Every breath was history. Honorable Nkosi, a bailiff stammered. You need to step back. She did. Not because she was told, Because she chose to. That difference mattered. The courthouse doors burst open 40 minutes later. News vans lined the street. Protesters pressed against barricades. Helicopter blades churned the air into a thunderous pulse. Amara emerged flanked by legal counsel. Her cheek was still faintly red. Microphones lunged toward her like metal flowers. Did you assault a police officer? Are you resigning? Do you regret your actions?
She thought of Malik's
She
mother.
paused. Of the
noise
boy's empty
swelled.
bedroom. Of the file photos the police had released, carefully selected to paint him as dangerous. She thought of the slap. I defended myself, she said. Her voice did not shake. And I will continue defending my constituents. The crowd roared. But behind the cameras, in the shadows near the courthouse steps, someone else was watching. Not angry. Not shocked. Strategic. Councilman Edgar Vale folded his hands behind his back, lips curving slightly. This was exactly what he had been waiting for. Nightfall. By midnight, the video had 12 million views. Headlines split down the middle. MP attacks officer in courtroom chaos. Officer assaults elected official on camera. Amara sat alone in her living room. Lights off, city glow filtering through the blinds. Ice pressed gently against her cheek. Her reflection stared back at her from the darkened television screen. She had crossed a line today. Not morally, but politically. And she knew what came next. Investigations. Threats. Character assassination. Or worse. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. A voice, smooth and measured. You've made this very difficult for us, Ms. Nkosi. For who? She asked. A pause. For everyone. The line went dead. Internal shift. Sleep did not come easily. She replayed the moment again and again, not the slap, but the second after. The choice. She could have absorbed it, could have taken the humiliation for the sake of optics. That would have been safer, easier, but something in her had refused. Not pride, dignity. And dignity, once awakened, does not go back to sleep. The stakes rise. At 6:12 a.m., the news broke. Officer Daniel Reeve was in critical condition. A head injury. Uncertain prognosis. Suddenly, the narrative shifted. Not a slap. Not self-defense. Attempted manslaughter. Amara closed her eyes. This was no longer about a courtroom moment. This was about power, and who was allowed to wield it without consequence. Her transformation had begun, and the system was preparing to strike back. By sunrise, the city had chosen sides. The air outside Amara Nkosi's townhouse carried the faint smell of rain and hot asphalt. News vans idled along the curb like predators conserving energy, their satellite dishes tilted skyward, patient, waiting. Inside, the television glowed soundlessly. Her face, the slap, the fall, freeze frame. Again, again, again. She muted it. Silence rushed in, thick and suffocating. Her chief of staff, Lena Morales, stood near the window, phone pressed to her ear, whispering in sharp, efficient bursts. Lena had the stillness of someone who survived storms by calculating their angles. They're calling it excessive force, Lena murmured, pacing. Yes, but only from one side. No, the speaker hasn't made a statement. Yes, Vale is already on 3 networks. Vale. Amara's jaw tightened. Councilman Edgar Vale had the polished smile of a man who understood how outrage could be shaped like clay. He had opposed her reform bill from the beginning, the one demanding independent investigations into police misconduct. He'd called it destabilizing. Now, destabilization had arrived gift-wrapped. Her phone vibrated again. This time, it was Malik's mother. Amara answered immediately. Mrs. Carter. On the other end, breathing. Fragile. Trembling. They're saying you attacked him, Mrs. Carter whispered. They're saying you're violent. Amara closed her eyes. I defended myself. I know. The woman said quickly, almost fiercely. I saw it. I saw everything. But they're already changing it. A pause. They changed my son too. The words settled like ash. Amara remembered the first time she'd met Malik's mother, sitting at a small kitchen table that still smelled faintly of cinnamon candles. Framed photos lined the wall. Birthdays, school awards, a crooked smile, missing a front tooth. He had been 17. They had described him as aggressive. The footage showed him standing still. The system was efficient at editing truth. I won't let them erase what happened, Amara said. But even as she said it, she understood something heavier. This wasn't about truth. It was about narrative dominance. And someone else was already writing. Officer Daniel Reeve lay beneath sterile white lights, machines humming with indifferent rhythm. Councilman Vale stood at the foot of the bed, hands clasped loosely. Reeve's wife sat beside him, eyes swollen, clutching her husband's motionless hand. "This never should have happened," Vale said softly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "She's dangerous," Mrs. Reeve whispered. Vale let the word linger. Dangerous. He stepped closer to the bed, lowering his tone. Daniel was doing his duty. There it was. The frame. Duty versus aggression. Reassuring hand
Order
on
versus
Mrs.
chaos.
Reeve's shoulder. Careful. Visible to the waiting cameras outside the glass. "I will make sure justice is done." His reflection in the hospital window did not look sorrowful. It looked focused. By noon, Parliament was in emergency session. The chamber buzzed like a hive struck by a stick. Colleagues avoided her gaze or held it too long. Whispers traveled faster than footsteps. Amara walked down the aisle in a navy suit this time. No charcoal, no softness. The speaker cleared his throat. "Given recent events," he began, "this body must consider whether the honorable member can continue to serve effectively while under investigation." There it was. Not suspension for wrongdoing. Suspension for optics. Amara rose slowly. Every movement deliberate. "Are we investigating assault?" she asked evenly. "Or are we investigating the fact that it was captured on camera?" Murmurs. The speaker shifted. "This is not the time." "It is precisely the time," she said. Her voice did not rise. It sharpened. An officer laid hands on an elected official inside a courtroom. "That is a matter of public concern. And you responded with force." Vale interjected smoothly from across the chamber. She turned toward him. For a brief second, something flickered between them. Recognition. He had wanted this. "You call self-defense force," she said. "I call it survival." Gasps. The word landed heavy. Survival implied threat. Threat implied systemic failure. Vale leaned back, folding his hands. Officer Reeve may never wake up. The chamber went still. Amara absorbed that. May never wake up. A weight settled in her chest. Not guilt, but consequence. She hadn't intended harm beyond escape. She hadn't calculated impact velocity or skull fracture probabilities. She had reacted. Now a man lay between life and death, and the nation demanded a villain. Lena spread documents across the dining table that evening. Video timestamps. Expert statements. Security protocols. "We need to get ahead of this," Lena said. "Forensic analysis shows he initiated contact. We can prove that." "Proof isn't power," Amara murmured. Lena paused. "You're thinking 3 moves ahead." "I'm thinking 5. Amara stood and walked to the window. Protesters had gathered again, candles flickering along the sidewalk. Some held signs with her name in bold letters. Others held signs with it crossed out. Unity fractures quickly under pressure. "They'll push for charges," Lena said quietly. "Assault. Maybe worse. Attempted manslaughter," Amara replied. The word tasted foreign in her mouth. Lena's eyes widened slightly. "You think they'll go that far?" "They need to make an example." "Of what?" "A woman who refused to shrink. A lawmaker who demanded accountability. A black MP who didn't absorb humiliation quietly." The unspoken answer lingered between them. 2 days later, a new video surfaced. Different angle. Grainy. Closer. It showed the moment before the slap. Reeve leaning in, jaw tight, whispering something inaudible. The internet slowed it down. Enhanced it. Lip readers claimed he'd said, "Know your place." The phrase spread like wildfire. "Know your place. Know your place." Hashtags multiplied. Suddenly, the slap wasn't the beginning of the story. It was a symptom. Vale held a press conference within the hour. "We must not jump to conclusions based on manipulated footage," he stated calmly. "Emotions are high." He never denied the phrase. He never confirmed it. He let ambiguity do its work. Late that night, alone again, Amara replayed the moment in her mind. Not the slap, not the fall, the whisper. Had he said it? Or had her memory filled the silence with every time she'd been told, subtly or explicitly, to shrink? She remembered her first campaign rally, a donor suggesting she toned down the intensity. She remembered a senior colleague calling her articulate, as if surprised. She remembered security trailing her longer than others in government buildings. Know your place. The phrase had lived in the air long before that courtroom. The slap had simply given it sound. But beneath the anger, something else stirred. Doubt. Not about her dignity. About the cost. If Reeve died. The thought was a blade. She sat heavily on the couch, hands trembling for the first time since the incident. Transformation is rarely clean. It scrapes. It tears. It demands sacrifice. The question was no longer whether she had defended herself. The question was whether she could withstand what came next. On the fourth morning, the indictment arrived. The envelope was thick, official, unforgiving. The state was charging her with aggravated assault resulting in critical injury. Lena swore under her breath. They moved fast. They had it prepared, Amara replied quietly. Her name, printed in bold across the document, felt unreal. She inhaled slowly. Member of Parliament. The cameras would be outside within minutes. The opposition would call for immediate resignation. International press would frame it as scandal, unrest, crisis. And beneath it all, the original issue, Malik's death, would fade further into the background. Strategic distraction. Vale's masterpiece. Unless she reframed it. Unless she changed the battlefield. That evening, she requested a live address. Not a press conference. A direct broadcast. Every network hesitated, then agreed. At 8 p.m., she stood before a simple podium. No flag. No dramatic lighting. Just her. Her cheek no longer red. Her posture unbroken. I stand before you not as a victim, she began, and not as a villain. The room was silent. I stand as a citizen who refused to be struck without response. Short sentence. Pause. Breath. I regret that a man is injured. Another pause. But I will not apologize for defending my body. The statement detonated across the nation. Some called it courageous. Others called it reckless. But no one called it small. As she stepped away from the podium, Lena exhaled shakily. You just split the country in half. Amara looked straight ahead. It was already split. Outside, the crowd roared, not unified, but awakened. And somewhere in a quiet hospital room, Officer Daniel Reeves' heart monitor shifted rhythm. A small change, barely noticeable, but enough to signal that this story was far from over. The beeping changed first. Not louder, not urgent, just different. A subtle stutter in rhythm. In the dim hospital room, fluorescent light hummed overhead, casting Officer Daniel Reeve in a pale, suspended glow. Tubes traced his arms like thin, artificial veins. Machines breathed for him with steady mechanical patience. Then his fingers twitched. His wife leaned forward instantly, chair scraping tile. Daniel. Another twitch. Slower. Intentional. The monitor adjusted again. In the hallway, a nurse looked up sharply. Across the city, Amara and Kosi stood in her kitchen, steam rising from untouched tea. The address had detonated exactly as predicted. Screens everywhere replayed her words in clipped fragments. I will not apologize. Defending my body. Not a villain. The smell of chamomile turned bitter as it cooled. Her phone vibrated across the marble counter. Lena. He's conscious. The words landed with unexpected force. Amara closed her eyes briefly. Stable. For now. A beat. And talking. The air thickened. What is he saying? Amara asked. Not much yet. But Vale is already at the hospital. Of course he was. By noon, the narrative shifted again. Officer Reeve had regained partial consciousness. He remembered being attacked. He remembered losing balance. He did not remember slapping her. Selective amnesia travels quickly through institutions. Vale stood outside the hospital under a canopy of microphones, voice measured, sympathetic. Daniel is a devoted officer and father. He does not recall striking anyone. Trauma can distort memory. The phrase was surgical. Distort memory. Not lie. Not fabricate. Just distort. He looked directly into the cameras. But what he does remember is fear. Fear. The word echoed everywhere by evening. Headlines multiplied. Officer recalls fear before assault. MP's response called disproportionate. Did self-defense go too far? In her townhouse, Amara watched the coverage without blinking. Fear. It was a powerful shield. It excused escalation. It justified force. It made aggressors sympathetic. She understood that language intimately. It had been used against her community for decades. Now it was aimed at her. Parliament moved swiftly. A vote of temporary suspension was scheduled. Not guilt. Not conviction. Just preservation of institutional integrity. Lena paced, papers clutched tightly. If they suspend you, it weakens the reform bill. It delays everything. They want delay, Amara said quietly. Outside her window, chants rose again. Justice for Malik. Stand with Amara. Opposing groups gathered across the street now, separated by barricades and police presence. Blue flags, black banners, anger humming beneath both. The sky hung low and gray, threatening rain. Her doorbell rang sharply. Security stiffened. Lena checked the monitor. Malik's mother stood outside, clutching something in her hands. Amara opened the door herself. Mrs. Carter's eyes were rimmed red but steady. "I brought this," she said, holding out a folded hoodie. Gray, worn, slightly faded. It was his favorite. Amara accepted it carefully. The fabric felt heavier than cotton should. "They're using you to bury him," Mrs. Carter whispered. "I know, but don't let them." The older woman's gaze sharpened. "They want you scared." Amara thought of the word echoing through every headline. "Fear.
Amara didn't
Are
answer
you?"
immediately.
Mrs. Carter asked.
She
She inhaled the faint scent lingering in the hoodie. Detergent, sun, something almost like youth itself. "Yes," she said finally. The admission did not weaken her. It clarified her. Mrs. Carter nodded slowly. "Good. That means you understand what's at stake." Parliament's chamber felt colder than usual. Lights harsher, eyes harder. Amara stood at her seat as the motion was read. Temporary suspension pending trial. For the good of public trust. Vale avoided her gaze until the final moment. Then he met it and smiled faintly. Votes flashed across the electronic board. Green, red, green, red. The count slowed as it neared conclusion. A single vote difference. Then two. Then three. The speaker cleared his throat. The motion passes. Applause erupted from one side of the chamber. Silence from the other. Amara gathered her papers calmly. No dramatic exit. No protest. As she walked down the aisle, the echo of her heels carried a rhythm that felt less like retreat and more like recalibration. Outside, rain began to fall. Suspension meant removal from committee rooms, legislative access, daily influence. It meant silence, if she accepted it. But silence has many forms. In the quiet of her home, hoodie folded beside her, Amara reviewed footage frame by frame. Not the slap. The seconds before. Reeves' posture. His stance. His hand tightening. There was something in his shoulders, a forward lean too aggressive for mere proximity. She zoomed in on his mouth. The grainy angle from the leaked video caught only half his lips. But she saw it. Not know your place. Something shorter. Harder. She rewound again. Slower. He had said one word before the slap. Enough. The tone mattered. Not exhausted. Commanding. Enough implied authority. Finality. Ownership of the moment. She leaned back slowly. The system hadn't snapped spontaneously. It had decided she had reached a limit. Enough of her questioning. Enough of her persistence. Enough of her presence. The slap had been punctuation. 3 nights later, her security detail alerted her to a request. Officer Daniel Reeve wanted to see her. Alone. The request felt surreal. Lena objected immediately. Absolutely not. He's conscious. He's mobile, the guard explained. Released under observation. Released. Fast recovery for a man once described as critical. Suspicion prickled beneath her skin. What does he want? Lena demanded. He didn't say. Amara considered. Fear is contagious. But so is confrontation. Arrange it, she said. They met in a neutral conference room inside a municipal building. No cameras. No press. Just fluorescent lights and a long wooden table. Reeve entered first. He looked thinner, paler. A faint scar traced his hairline. But his eyes were sharp, alert, calculating. They regarded each other across the table like two people who had survived the same storm from opposite sides. "You look well," he said. It was almost polite. "So do you," she replied. Silence settled between them. He shifted in his chair. "I don't remember hitting you." Her gaze did not waver. "I remember." A muscle twitched in his jaw. "They say you twisted my wrist." "You grabbed my arm." He leaned forward slightly. "I was doing my job. And I was standing." The air felt thin. He studied her face, searching, perhaps, for anger, for regret. "Do you regret it?" he asked quietly. She considered the question carefully. "I regret that you were hurt." A pause. "But not that I defended myself." His eyes darkened. "You could have stepped back." "I did." "You followed." Another silence. Then, softly, he said, "They needed this." She blinked once. "Who?" He didn't answer directly. "Things were getting unstable," he continued. "Too much noise." Noise. She thought of protests, of reform bills, of scrutiny. "You think silencing me stabilizes anything?" she asked. He looked down briefly, then back up. I think sometimes pressure needs release. And you were the valve? His expression flickered, irritation, doubt. Be careful, he said quietly. It was not a threat. It sounded like advice. She stood slowly. So should you. As she walked toward the door, he added, almost reluctantly, I didn't expect you to move like that. There it was. Surprise. Underestimation. She paused. You didn't expect me to resist. And then she left. Back in her car, rain streaking across tinted glass, Amara felt something shift internally. The conflict was no longer about one slap. It wasn't even about one officer. It was about architecture. Power built in layers. Pressure applied strategically. Reeve had not acted alone in spirit, even if he had in motion. He had been a reaction. The system had felt threatened. And systems, when threatened, reveal their seams. Her suspension gave her distance. Gave clarity. Distance gave She was no longer fighting a moment. She was exposing a pattern. And patterns, once visible, are harder to deny. Outside, the city lights reflected in rain-soaked streets like fractured stars. Somewhere beyond the noise and the spin and the headlines, something else was building. Not outrage, not fear, momentum. And this time, it was not accidental. The trial began on a morning so bright it felt intentional. Sunlight poured through the courthouse windows, slicing the air into sharp golden beams. Outside, barricades lined the steps again. Protesters stood shoulder to shoulder, some holding candles even in daylight. Others held silence. The city had grown tired of shouting. Now it waited. Inside courtroom 4, the smell of polished wood and old paper clung to the air. Reporters filled every bench. Sketch artists sharpened pencils. The hum of whispered speculation vibrated like distant static. Amar and Kosi stood at the defense table in a slate gray suit. No jewelry, no dramatic color, just presence. Across the aisle, Officer Daniel Reeves sat upright, suit collar stiff against his neck. The faint scar along his hairline caught the light. He looked composed, restored, controlled. Councilman Edgar Vale sat behind him, not officially part of the case, but close enough to shape its shadow. The judge entered. The gavel struck once, and history leaned forward. They framed it simply. An officer performing his duty. An elected official losing control. They played the fall in slow motion. Again, again, again. The thud of Reeves' body against marble echoed unnaturally loud through courtroom speakers. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Excessive, the prosecutor repeated. Disproportionate. Unnecessary. The words stacked like bricks. Then they called Reeve to the stand. He walked carefully, deliberately. Saturday. Swore the oath. Officer Reeve. The prosecutor began gently. What do you remember? He inhaled. I remember asking her to comply. His voice was steady. I remember feeling tension escalate. He paused, measured. And I remember being afraid. There it was again. Fear. It had carried this entire case. The prosecutor nodded solemnly. Afraid of what? Of losing control of the situation. A subtle phrase. Not afraid of her. Afraid of losing control. In the gallery, someone shifted uncomfortably. Amara watched without expression. He was careful, trained, but something in his tone carried strain, like a wire pulled too tight. Did you strike her? The prosecutor asked. I don't recall doing so. Not no. Not yes. Just absence. Memory, once again, blurred at convenience. When it was Amara's turn to testify, the courtroom seemed to contract. She walked to the stand without hesitation. Swore the oath. Saturday. Her voice, when she spoke, did not waver. He grabbed my arm. The defense played the original footage. Not the fall. The seconds before. The tightening grip. The shift in posture. The forward lean. Frame by frame. Slowed. Zoomed. The courtroom held its breath as the grainy audio crackled through the speakers. A whisper. Faint. Rough. Enough. The word landed like a stone in still water. The defense attorney paused the video. Do you believe that word was directed at you? Yes. And what did you understand it to mean? Amara looked toward the jury. Not pleading. Not angry. Clear. I understood it to mean that my voice had exceeded someone else's tolerance. Silence spread. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just heavy. The defense continued. Why did you respond physically? She inhaled slowly. Because when someone uses force against you, your body chooses between freezing and surviving. A juror blinked rapidly. Another shifted in their seat. I did not calculate injury, she continued. I reacted to protect myself. Her words were not sharpened by anger. They were anchored in truth. The prosecutor rose, voice cool. Ms. Nkosi, you have received self-defense training, correct? Yes. So you are skilled. I am trained. And you knew that twisting a person's wrist and shifting their center of gravity could cause significant harm. I knew it would create distance. Distance that resulted in a critical head injury. A pause. Amara did not look away. Distance that prevented further contact. The prosecutor's lips thinned. Is it true, he pressed, that you were under immense political pressure at the time? Yes. And that Officer Reeve was associated with the department you were publicly criticizing? Yes. So you had motive. The courtroom tightened. Amara's expression did not change. I had motive to speak, she said calmly. Not to attack. The words hung there. Clean. Undeniable. Then came the unexpected moment. The defense called a final witness. A forensic audio analyst. They replayed the whisper again. Frequency bands. The courtroom leaned closer. Beneath, enough, another faint sound surfaced. A breath. And then, sit. It was barely audible. But there. Sit. Command. Not request. Not plea. Command. The analyst explained calmly how layered audio revealed suppressed tones. The prosecutor objected. The judge overruled. The word lingered in the air like a crack in glass. Sit. Control restored. Voice diminished. Body positioned. The jury watched the video again. Reeves' posture. His grip. The microsecond before the slap. Suddenly the narrative shifted. Not dramatically, but enough. During recess, Amara stepped into an empty corridor. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating dust suspended midair. Her reflection in the glass looked steadier than she felt. Footsteps approached. She turned. Officer Reeves stood a few feet away. No lawyers. No microphones. Just two people caught in the center of something larger than either of them. You pushed harder than I thought you would, he said quietly. She held his gaze. You underestimated me. A faint exhale escaped him. They wanted order. And you thought I was disorder? He hesitated. Yes. The honesty surprised them both. She stepped closer, not threatening, not retreating. Questioning power is not disorder, she said softly. It is democracy. The words seemed to settle between them. Democracy. Messy. Uncomfortable. Alive. His shoulders lowered slightly. Things move slowly, he murmured. Not if people refuse to move at all, she replied. For the first time, something like uncertainty flickered in his eyes. Then footsteps echoed down the hall, and the moment dissolved. Hours later, the jury returned. The courtroom stood. The foreperson's hands trembled slightly as she unfolded the paper. On the charge of aggravated assault resulting in critical injury. A breath. We find the defendant. The pause stretched into eternity. Not guilty. The word detonated softly. Not cheers. Not chaos. Just an exhale from hundreds of lungs releasing weeks of tension. Amara closed her eyes briefly. Not in triumph. In relief. The judge called for order. But something irreversible had already shifted. Outside, the city reacted differently this time. No riot. No eruption. Just conversation. Slow. Measured. Panels debated use of force standards. Committees reopened reform discussions. Parliament scheduled hearings that had once been postponed indefinitely. Councilman Vale stood before cameras again, expression controlled. We respect the verdict, he said. But his voice lacked the sharp certainty it once carried. Power had recalibrated. Not destroyed. Not conquered. But exposed. And exposure changes behavior. Weeks later, Amara returned to Parliament. The chamber felt different. Not friendlier, but aware. As she resumed her seat, a few colleagues nodded subtly. Others avoided her eyes. She rose to speak on the reform bill once more. This time, the room listened without interruption. I do not stand here as someone who won, she began. I stand here as someone who was tested. Her voice flowed steady, deliberate. This was never about a courtroom incident. It was about whether dignity is conditional. A pause. It is not. The vote on independent oversight passed narrowly that evening. Not unanimously. Not easily. But passed. The system had not collapsed. It had bent. Just slightly. But enough. That night, alone again in her living room, Amara unfolded Malik's gray hoodie. She ran her fingers across the fabric, feeling the softness worn thin at the cuffs. Justice had not resurrected him. Justice rarely restores what is lost, but it can prevent repetition. Outside, the city lights flickered against the dark sky. Her cheek no longer bore any trace of that day. But something deeper remained, not a scar. A lesson. They had told her enough. She had answered differently. Not with rage, not with revenge, with refusal. Refusal to shrink. Refusal to be silent. Refusal to accept that fear belongs to only one side of power. Transformation is not loud. It does not always roar. Sometimes it stands still in a courtroom, absorbs impact, and chooses not to disappear. The slap had echoed for a second. The response had echoed longer. And the silence that followed was no longer submission. It was change.